The Flicks Tape.
They have no future as they have no past. Tomorrow as today, slavery will be their only possible privilege.
We gods, man. We kings, man. We lords.
I was born black, I live black, and I'm gonna die probably because some cracker that knows I'm black better than you, nigga, is probably gonna put a bullet in the back of my head.
This is the remix. My father was raised in the era when black niggas couldn't claim Native American.
Aborigines, which means what? Black folks. But you never find a white aborigine. Rather, aborigines are called natives, or they're always dark-skinned people. You and I are aborigines, but you don't like to be called an aborigine. You want to be called an American. Aborigine actually means from the beginning. Two Latin words, ab meaning from, origine meaning the beginning.
Great shock around the age of 5 or 6 or 7 to discover the flag to which you have pledged allegiance along with everybody else has not pledged allegiance to you. It comes as a great shock to discover that Gary Cooper killing off the Indians when you were rooting for Gary Cooper, that the Indians were you, that the Indians were you. It comes as a great shock to discover that the country, which is your birthplace, and to which you owe your life and your identity.
Remember that big Indian dude in that movie? Mm-hmm. He was cool. And then he couldn't talk unless he was talking about gum?
Yeah. You know, I think you're not supposed to say Indian either.
No way, really?
Yeah. I think you're supposed to call them African Americans.
Oh, you're shoemakers now. And more importantly, you're a person of color. You're no longer a Nipmuc person. And that shows through in these county histories and also in the census records at the time. You find a person described in the 1860 census as an Indian. In the 1870 census, they're described as a person of color or a colored person. Same person, but the census taker, as part of the white dominant society, decides that this person is no longer Nipmuc.
Since y'all always screaming about DNA, watch what the biology professor says about DNA. Watch this.
Smith's breakdown from Ancestry showed 97% European and 2% Asian.
I'm a black girl. I am not a Jewish white lady. I'm black. My parents were black.
She contacted Ancestry with questions, but says a rep told her the results are accurate.
These DNA tests for ethnicity are entertainment value only.
William Gilliland is a biology professor at DePaul. He says DNA kits can be great for connecting family members and finding relatives, but the science for ethnicity testing isn't as concrete.
There's nothing that confident for ethnicity. There's no diagnostic nucleotide. You can say this person is from Europe, this person's from Africa.
You see that? DNA can't tell you where you're from. A scholar tells the truth. Watch this.
But many African Americans, you are the Native Americans. You're not even African Americans, you're Native Americans. You're the ones that they brought blankets with, was it smallpox or whatever diseases, and wiped out entire communities because they said they came in peace, but they actually came in war. And they are still warring us right until this day. So there are those beloveds of you who really don't feel any connection to Mama Africa. And this is just, you know, a confirmation, a reassurance that America belongs to you.
So Africans know this history, but nobody else does? Come on, make it make sense.
At me. And so with the help of my wife, we extracted enough saliva to send off in the mail. We were so excited to see the results. After about 3 months, we were shocked. My lizard was 51% Ashkenazi Jewish. He was also 48% West Asian. This was really interesting. They also gave us a little bit of his background and his history, what he liked to eat, etc. Let us know which animal's DNA we should send in next.
You don't have to try to be something you're not. Trying to be something I'm not? Trying to be proud of my African heritage? That's being something I'm not, then fine. My grandmother was a full-blooded Iroquois. I know all of that, Mama. Then know this. I am alive because of the blood of a people who never scraped or begged or apologized for what they were. They asked only one thing of this world, to be allowed to be. It broke my heart when you changed your name. I gave you my grandmother's name, a woman who bore 9 children and educated them all. Who held off 6 white men with a shotgun when they tried to drag one of her sons off to jail for not knowing his place. And you had to reach into an African dictionary to find a name that would make you proud.
My father was raised in the era when black niggas couldn't claim Native American. Making music would've thought I had help, but the Indians I know wanna be the chief they self.
All right. Let me get some fists and feathers in the chat if you can hear me loud, crisp, and clear. And we'll go ahead and get this party started. This is going to be an interesting broadcast. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty on how the European invaders stole our land, to put it simply. We're going to get into the treaties, the false promises, the acts of terrorism, and everything in between. A lot of these acts are going to be happening on the East Coast, and we know that there was a huge population of Aboriginal American Indians that were melanated on the East Coast. I mean, we know about the Iroquois Nation, right? We know about the different native confederacies. I've been doing some broadcasts on that as of late. But guys, make sure to smash that like button on the way in, share the video, hit the Cash App or the PayPal if you support the mission. Oh, and guys, I'm actually bringing back the genealogy consultation. So if you guys want to know what steps I personally took to do my family's genealogy and apply for citizenship with my tribe, then go ahead and send me an email, mike@keymediapro.com. But let's get into the content.
This continent has some of the most dramatic landscapes on the planet, from the ocean shorelines to the alpine mountains and the sandy deserts. And also in this landmass, from coast to coast and everywhere in between, there lived hundreds, if not thousands, of different nations, tribes of people whose land this was. This was their home. But then others showed up to these shorelines in their boats. And that is when everything changed. In the spring of 1803, 2 American politicians visiting Paris closed the sweetest real estate deal they had ever seen. With the simple stroke of a pen, their country doubled in size, all for just $15 million. But in this deal, which was called the Louisiana Purchase, the US didn't actually buy this land from France. France didn't actually own the land. What the United States was buying was the imperial rights to this huge swath of North America. This basically meant that France would stay out of the way and let the budding new empire, the United States, colonize it without interfering. If the United States really wanted ownership over this land, they would need to get it from the people who were here first, which at the time was lots of different native tribes. These are the people who had been here for thousands of years, way before Europeans had the idea of leaving their continent. And this land that the US just bought was theirs. Oh, and
what we're going to learn through this video is that the whole notion of American independence, freedom, Bill of Rights, Manifest Destiny, all that good stuff, basically what it was is when they fled Europe, they were really tired of how, Europe was ran with the different ruling elite and the ruling families. And let's face it, they were some poor, street urchins over there in Europe. So when they came over here, they had to try to create something new. They had to try to promote the illusion of, freedom and fairness and equality. So you're going to learn that a lot of these treaties, a lot of these promises, a lot of these land purchases were really actually terrorist acts done under threat. And the only reason that they did a treaty in the first place was to have a paper trail so that centuries in the future, when people are like, hey, it's fucked up, you sold our ancestors' land, they can now say, well, you know what? Actually, they sold it to us and just did some really bad business deals.
And this isn't just me, like some modern enlightened person looking back and judging the United States at this time. The US knew that this wasn't their land and that they were going to have to buy it from the people living there. And their big plan was to do things differently, not like the old imperial powers that they had just broken away from. In fact, George Washington was, quote, determined that the US government's administration of Indian affairs shall be directed entirely by the great principles of justice and humanity.
What did I tell you guys? On paper, it sounds good. Guys, we're going to do this Indian affairs stuff, and we're going to do it with justice and with humanity on paper. But in reality, it's done with bloodshed.
Go USA, let's do this in the right way. So instead of conquest, they would negotiate and sign formal treaties with these native nations. Then they would pay them for their land, fair and square. After all, this was a country whose founding document highlights justice, tranquility, welfare, and liberty. In our series, How the U.S. Stole, we get to see how the U.S. grew from a group of English settlers to a global superpower. But none of those stories would exist without this one, the origin story, the first thing that the U.S. ever stole. So Europeans are pouring into this newly formed country, the United States. And the government is making deals and signing treaties with the tribes, allowing these newcomer immigrants to settle on their land. At first, this is a fairly peaceful transactional process. The US would offer food, farming equipment, cash, the services of a blacksmith, all in exchange for ownership over this land. But unsurprisingly, a lot of these tribes had no interest in moving out of their ancestral lands.
And for the tribes that did willingly sell pieces of the land or trade off pieces of the land, you have to recognize that these Aboriginal American Indians, they viewed land differently. If they've got a tribe of 1,000 of them and they live in this vast area that's 100 square miles, well, they're not really tripping that much if some Europeans settle up, down the way, a few miles away. To them, it's no big deal. But we're going to learn over time, a lot of these tribes did realize, wait a minute, they have some real negative intentions.
In exchange for farming equipment. And this is where all of George Washington's ideals of justice and humanity really start to dissolve. The US was becoming a more powerful nation. They needed more land for their booming population. So the impatient settlers and their government started playing dirty.
The westward movement was like a great tidal wave.
You start to see what happens when these tribes say no to the newly powerful United States. In one instance, one group of tribes up near the Great Lakes didn't want to sell their land. They told the United States that this river would be the border and to not cross it, to stay off their land. The US said no, and they took them to war and lost twice. But on the third time, they won the battle and forced the tribes to sign a treaty giving away all of this land, basically all of present-day Ohio. Something very similar happened down here when the Seminole tribes refused to leave their land. The U.S. military came in.
And we all know about the Black Aboriginals and the Seminole tribe. We all know about the Seminole Wars, right, guys?
Another war, killing thousands, forcing the tribes to sign a treaty and pushing them into the swampy interior of the state, where they had no access to their farmland or the ocean. Down here in what was becoming Alabama, the Muskogee Nation refused to sign a relocation treaty, but not wanting to go to war, agreed to sell a portion of their land in return for a guarantee that they could keep the rest. And the United States agreed, and they actually did. And the Muskogee kept their ancestral lands forever. Womp womp, no, that didn't happen. 4 years later, a bunch of white settlers moved in, boxing the Muskogee out of their ancestral land. As tensions grew because of this violated agreement, the U.S. military was called in to force the Muskogee out of their lands.
Come on, guys, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. The broadcast that we did right before this one, we were talking about the migrant crisis. We were talking about these migrants coming over here, raping and killing children, doing a whole bunch of degenerate crime. And as you can see, this has been America's business strategy from day one. We need to subvert the natives. So what do? We import a bunch of migrants. We import a bunch of immigrants to do our bidding.
Treaty was ever signed. I mean, the shenanigans ranged the whole gamut here. They would get tribal leaders drunk to trick them into signing this paper that gave them all the land. They would appoint random people to be the tribal leaders and then tell them to sign away the land for the whole tribe. In another conflict, the Sioux and Arapaho nations defeated the US military over and over until the US finally signed a peace treaty acknowledging their land. And they were safe. Until gold was discovered 8 years later, and the US broke their treaty, redrew the boundaries, built roads on their land, and before you know it, you've got a bunch of white guys with gold pans harvesting this land. Treaties and justice be damned. Eventually, other tribes caught on to what was going to happen, realizing that refusing the US government would mean violence. So they would sign the paper, take the money, and leave. Over the course of almost 100 years, the United States signed 368 treaties with tribal nations, who were driven out one way or another to make way for white settlers, who established control over this land that their government had stolen for them.
Come on, guys, peep the tactics. They'll kill them, they'll import foreigners to subvert them, they'll try to get them drunk and convince them to sign treaties. They'll take some fake natives, some $5 Indians, and say, okay, this guy says he's the chief of the tribe and he signed, so now we own the land. I mean, they were doing the most egregious things, but it was under the guise of justice and freedom, right?
And yes, you have all the paperwork, all the spreadsheets that they were making, all the treaties, a nice paper trail. But this was all a facade of justice, a thinly veiled campaign for imperial conquest. Before we go on to the story, I just need to tell you that we don't have a sponsor for today's video. Lately, I've been hearing from some sponsors that my videos are too political.
Yeah, and I'm demonetized and shadow banned. We don't want to hear about it, y'all. We don't want to hear about it. Hit the like button, share the video, throw 5 on the Cash App or the PayPal if y'all support the mission. We also got the Patreon popping. We got exclusive content over there on the Patreon. We ain't going to hear about man's first world problems. I think he got like 5 million subs. He doing well for himself. He fine.
Extermination project that was going down. Here in the Deep South, you had these 5 large nations that lived side by side with the settlers for a long time. They had all signed treaties with the United States that acknowledged their right to this land. Many of them spoke English, practiced farming, wore European clothes. Some even owned slaves. Because of this, these 5 tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee, and Seminole, were known as the 5 civilized tribes.
Peep the verbiage, peep the lingo. When you learn about the 5 civilized tribes as a child in grade school, you think, oh, all the indigenous folks were wild savages, but there was these 5 tribes that were like good, normal human beings. No. 5 civilized tribes are just code names for the 5 sellout tribes. The 5 tribes that assimilated. If they didn't sell out, they assimilated, or at least their leaders did at the time.
And there's an alternative world where these tribes could have remained on their land, living side by side with the Europeans as they settled. But that's not what happened, mostly because of cotton. Farmers down here were getting super rich off of a very valuable cash crop called cotton that they could sell to textile mills around the world. It was an industry made even more profitable by its key input, free labor from stolen Africans. There was this one strip of land down here called the Black Belt Prairie that was particularly desirable for farming cotton. But as you can see, it was locked up in what the United States treaties had formally acknowledged as belonging to native nations. But the farmers down here were looking at this as like, this is a perfect place to expand our cotton kingdom. So,
and peep game, even the dude right now, even though he's a great documentarian, a great filmmaker, his version of history is still a bit skewed. You know, he really only mentioned African slaves. Well, guess what, guys? Only 4% of the African slaves transported during the transatlantic slave trade, only 4% went to North America. They say that number is between 100,000 and 300,000. And guess what else? We know for a fact that there was 300,000 white slaves working plantations they shipped from Europe. So it's interesting how He talks about the African slaves, doesn't talk about the white slaves, and fails to mention the Native Americans that were reclassified as Negro and placed on plantation alongside with the Africans and the poor whites. Let's talk about it, y'all. History is much more nuanced than people realize.
These southern slave owners did what was kind of becoming U.S. policy towards the people living on the land that they wanted. They made up their own rules. The state of Georgia was particularly aggressive in trying to clear this land out, or in the words of their governor at the time, to replace, quote, all of the red with white population. They targeted the Cherokee Nation, passing a law that abolished their governments. The Cherokee...
And we all know what they mean when they say red. Red skin, red people, red bone. What is a red bone, y'all? What's a red bone? That's us. They ain't talking about actual people that really had red skin like the Redskins logo. No, red skin is another word for red bone, which basically means copper colored.
You're not going to stand for this. So they fight back using the same shenanigans that the United States is trying to use, the U.S. legal system. They take Georgia to court, a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And guess what? The Cherokee Nation won. Like, there was no way around the fact that they had ironclad rights to this land, signed and sealed. The highest court in the country just ruled that the states could not impose on tribal sovereignty. But, as we all learned in government class, a ruling from the judicial branch only works if the executive branch enforces it. Oh, and who was in charge of the executive branch? Oh, this guy. The guy who wrote a letter to his wife during the War of 1812 from the battlefield saying that he had successfully slaughtered 170 Native Americans in, quote, an elegant style. Oh, and the guy who's on our $20 bill? Yeah, him. Andrew Jackson thought that negotiating treaties with the people who were living here was a ridiculous notion. So he looks at the Supreme Court ruling that validates the Cherokees' right to their land, and he literally responds in the snarkiest way possible, saying, the Chief Justice, John Marshall, has, quote, made his decision. Now let him enforce it. No, he was not going to enforce it. Jackson had a different plan in mind. It came in the form of a new law that he pushed through both houses of Congress. His whole worldview towards First Americans embodied in a piece of American legislation, the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This law used taxpayer money to get tribes out of the United States and to relocate them to an uninhabitable place that surely no American settler will ever end up.
The Great Plains seemed an inhospitable land to people familiar with the eastern states and of Europe.
This became their dumping ground, and it came with a promise. Move here and we will never mess with you again. And what's crazy to me is that even after all of the shenanigans, all the facades, they continued to play this charade, saying that the nation of Indians may choose to exchange their land where they now reside. The law says that the government had to negotiate these treaties fairly, voluntarily, peacefully, and that the government would, quote, forever secure and guarantee them their new land, and that they wouldn't break any of the pre-existing agreements that they had made in previous treaties. But no, this was just more pretending, a paper trail of pretend humanity. Just as Andrew Jackson had ignored the Supreme Court ruling, he had no intention in following the law that he helped create. But he kept up the ruse. More documents, more signatures, more paper that made these civilized, justice-minded people feel like they weren't orchestrating a mass ethnic cleansing, sanctioned by the government, paid for by taxes, but they were. So this law is implemented, and the United States government, military, and even private companies start to ramp up their removal efforts of First Americans. They focus in on these 5 tribes that were sitting atop the land that they wanted for their cotton empire. More bribes, more pretend negotiations, and when push came to shove, more threats of violence. The Cherokee eventually signed a treaty agreeing to sell their last portion of land, and they moved west, out to their little rectangle of land that had been allocated to them by the government on maps. The only problem was that the leader who signed the treaty on behalf of the Cherokee people was not actually the real leader. They had no authority to make this decision. The Cherokee chief furiously protested this, but the US didn't care. They had their signature from someone. In their eyes, all was justified. Between 1831 and 1838, nearly every member from the 5 tribes was expelled from their land. 100,000 people, whose home this was, now forced to walk by foot for more than 1,000 miles through brutal weather and terrain towards a little box on the map. a place they had never been before. The Cherokee would eventually call this journey the Trail Where We Cried, or the Trail of Tears. Some tried to fight back against their oppressors, and others stood their ground until they were forcibly bound in chains by the US government and herded west at gunpoint. Their land was vacant, and cotton farmers with their slaves moved in, and the economy grew. We'll never know how many people died during all of this, how many lives were really destroyed. Some people say 3,000, other estimates say 15,000, but you don't need those numbers to see how destructive this was. It was systematic, it was documented, and it was enshrined in law. We have a paper trail of all of it, showing the receipts, the payments, the treaties, the bureaucracy of it all. It's like a bunch of spreadsheets from the 1800s. American settlers, in an effort to be different from the old world empires they fled, ended up carrying out the first state-sponsored ethnic cleansing. There's a reason why Hitler, 100 years later, references this exact event, this process, when he was carrying out his own ethnic cleansing. He said that the Volga, which is a river in Russia, would be, quote, our Mississippi. He said that Europe, not America, would be the land of unlimited possibilities. The story of what happened to many nations of the first Americans doesn't end here. In fact, this is kind of the beginning. We're going to make a second part to this video, and in that part 2, I want to show you what happens next once these tribes arrive to their little rectangle on the map. Indian Territory, the place where these tribes were forced out, dumped, and left to build a new life, and how they once again tried to fight back using the legal frameworks that had pushed them out, and how all of that led to the establishment of one state in our country that could have looked a lot different.
Come on, y'all, let's get into it. Put a 1 in the chat if you guys didn't know the nitty-gritty of how they stole our land. I mean, from broken promise to terrorist act to terrorist act, importing more foreigners, putting imposters into our tribes to sign bad business arrangements. I mean, guys, I didn't really know until I watched this, the nitty-gritty into how devious and savage not the natives were, not the indigenous people, but these Europeans. They the true savage. Come on, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. I see some 1s in the chat. I see some 1s. New Era knew what's up. But yeah, y'all, and then Tulsa happens. Yes, they've been doing this since the beginning of their occupation. Terrorist acts, more terrorist acts. I just watched a documentary about Martin Luther King Jr. Apparently his family descends from Aboriginal Indians. Did y'all know this whole time that when they say, oh, Martin Luther King Jr., he cheated on his wife and they sent the audio tapes? Guess what, guys? Did you know? That was totally fabricated by the FBI. Did you know that nobody has ever heard those tapes? Did you know that it was just white FBI agents saying what they say was said on the tapes, and they're saying that they heard him smashing white girls in the hotel? How do you tell a woman's ethnicity just by the sound of her voice? Oh, this was just another terrorist act to take down one of our Aboriginal leaders. Just like we're learning, they have perpetuated countless terrorist attacks to take down our Aboriginal leaders. Not only was MLK Indian, but goddamn it, I just learned earlier today, Nat Turner was as well. I just watched a 2-hour-long expose earlier today. I'm trying to figure out how to clip it down to bring it to you guys in an easy-to-digest format. But I just watched a 2-hour production earlier today going through the paperwork genealogy of Nat Turner's family. And he was I don't want to butcher it, I think it was a Nottoway Indian. I think the name of the tribe was Nottoway. But guys, let's get into it. Come on. A lot of forgotten history. Braxton says, and the Devil's Punch Bowl in Georgia. Yep, facts. The Civil Rights Act was nicknamed the Indian Act. Yeah, I wonder why. I wonder why. Power to the God says, yeah, he had Indian and Black European blood. Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. New Era says, I've been told you that, MLK. It was our human rights movement until it got hijacked into the civil rights movement. Yep. Jay says 98% of FBA is Native American. Facts. Facts. D. Dennis says 90% of American Indians are blacks. Period. Yes. Blacks that were reclassified as Negroes and other slaves, placed on plantations, and now through media and revisionist history, they try to tell us all of us come from Africa. When if we actually do our paper genealogy, god damn it, we Aboriginal. Come on, let's talk about it. Come on. And that's why I started to open up the Indigenous consultations once again, because I have so many people who reach out to me. 3 appointments scheduled for tomorrow of people who said, "Hey, Mike, my family always said we were Native. I watch your content. It motivates me. It inspires me. I want to do right by my family and actually do my genealogy. Maybe even apply for tribal citizenship, but I don't know how to do it. I've Googled it. I've researched it. I don't know where to turn." And since this is a process that me and my family has gone through successfully, and now because of it, we have citizenship with the Muskegee Creek Nation. God damn it, I feel like I kind of owe it to my community to drop some gems and let you guys know the step-by-step process that I took in achieving that citizenship. But let's talk about it, y'all. Let's talk about it. Casey says, why do you think that the system of mediocrity of white supremacy is so fragile? Built on lies. Yeah. Hey guys, peep game. Hitler said that he admired Andrew Jackson and how the Europeans dealt with the natives, y'all. Hitler said he admired the paper genocide that they did with the native black folks. Oh my gosh. If Hitler is admired by your work, then what does that say about you? What does that say about you? That Hitler saw how the European settlers took over the indigenous folks and he used that as a source of inspiration. Oh man, truth is way stranger than fiction. D. Dennis says, yes, Indians and European black blood. Facts. Braxton says, then Rosewood, Florida, Slocum, Texas, Colfax, LA, Elaine, Seneca Village, plenty of other black massacres. Yep. And if it's not a black massacre, it's destroying us through the educational system. If it's not that, it's biological terrorism. I mean, we all know about the Tuskegee Airmen, right? Come on. Jay Hawk says, Africans know we are Native Indian. This is why they are jealous of FBA. They not like us. Facts and then some. Y'all know in the title sequence that I play, there's even this African professor, this African doctor. I think her name is Dr. Mumbai. Yeah, here she is, Dr. Mumbai. So you telling me even Africans on the continent of Africa know that we're Aboriginal, but nobody else does, huh? Nobody else.
Watch this.
But many African Americans, you are the Native Americans. You're not even African Americans, you're Native Americans. You're the ones that they brought blankets with, was it smallpox or whatever diseases, and wiped out entire communities because they said they came in peace, but they actually came in war. And they are still warring us right until this day. So there are those beloveds of you who really don't feel any connection to Mama Africa. And this is just, a confirmation, a reassurance that America belongs to you.
So Africans know this history, but nobody else does.
Come on, y'all. Come on. Make it make sense, y'all. Make it make sense. Speaking of Native Black Americans, speaking of Aboriginal history and culture, guys, don't go anywhere, because as soon as this broadcast ends, we're going to dive into another one. And in this next broadcast, we're actually going to be discussing the self-appointed Prince of Pan-Africanism, Umar Johnson. And Umar Johnson is going to get in a heated debate with an Aboriginal sister, and he's going to claim that there's no such thing as Indigenous Black Americans. I mean, Umar Johnson, the Prince of Pan goofiness, right? The one who's really modern day pushing the we all kings and queens from Africa bullshit, right? He's going to get in a heated debate with a woman for doing what? What did she do? Did she call him a scammer for not building the school? Did she question his infatuation with cookies? Nah, none of that. She just identifies as a Native American, and that triggers Pan-Africans for some reason. It triggers them to the core. I don't know why. I don't know why so many people have a vested interest in trying to tell us what we should identify with. But that time is up, y'all. That time is up. Prior to the God says American Indians up, bloodline over doctrine. Facts. D. Dennis says Hitler followed racist white Americans. Facts. Tech Phoenix says, I already knew my second great grandmother was Cherokee and her husband was supposed to be black, but I found out through the census when they moved to Oklahoma, they lived on Choctaw territory. While he worked the coal mines, I'm going to guess that wasn't even possible unless he was truly Choctaw. Yeah, let's get into it. But guys, don't go anywhere. As soon as this broadcast ends, there's going to be a 10-second countdown on your screen, and the next stream is going automatically. I'll see you over there in just a moment. Don't touch that dial.